Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. Dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised.
I've lived most of my life in Wyoming, out where the land stretches out so far that you can stand still and hear absolutely nothing but the wind. And for as long as I can remember, I've always preferred that kind of silence, because at least out there, when something feels off, you can usually point to it. You can usually say, it's just the wind, it's just an animal, it's just your imagination. But the problem is, I didn't grow up only there, and the other place I spent my childhood in never gave me that kind of clarity. My grandparents lived in West Virginia, deep in the mountains, in this old house that had been in the family for generations. And when I say old, I don't mean charming old. I mean the kind of old where the wood feels tired, where the walls creak even when no one's moving, where every room feels like it remembers something you don't. My parents always encouraged me to spend time there, said it was good for me, that being close to nature would ground me. And honestly, I loved it. I really did. But even as a kid, there was always something about that house that made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain. And that feeling was always tied to one place: the attic. It wasn't just that I wasn't allowed up there. It was how strict that rule was, how absolute it felt. It wasn't even up for discussion, and my grandmother enforced it in a way that didn't feel normal. Not like a "don't go up there, you'll get hurt" kind of thing, but more like she was genuinely afraid of what would happen if I did. My grandfather, on the other hand, used to tell me stories about it, always smiling, always acting like it was just for fun. But the stories themselves were never playful. They were creepy. Like they were meant to sound like jokes, but had something underneath them that stuck with me long after he finished talking. And I was a kid. I didn't know how to separate what was real from what wasn't, especially when everything around me seemed to confirm that something wasn't right. Because the attic was always sealed, always locked, always off limits. And the house itself had secrets. I knew that before I even knew what that meant. There were passages in that place, hidden ones. Small crawl spaces behind walls, narrow doors tucked into corners that didn't make sense. And I found them the way kids always do, by accident at first, and then on purpose, turning it into a game, learning how to move through the house without being seen, popping out in places my grandparents didn't expect, thinking I was clever, thinking it was just something fun I had discovered. The best part was that they never knew I knew. Or at least, I don't think they did. And for a long time, it stayed that way. Just a harmless secret. Something that made me feel like the house belonged to me in a way it didn't belong to anyone else. Until the day I found the passage that led somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. I must have been around 8. Maybe a little younger, and I remember it so clearly because even now, thinking about it, I get that same feeling in my chest, like something tightening, like my body remembers before my mind does. The passage was narrower than the others, darker too, like it hadn't been used in a long time. And I followed it anyway, because that's what I did. I kept going until I found where it led, and when I reached the end, there was a door, and it wasn't locked. That was the first thing that felt wrong, because every other entrance to the attic was sealed shut. I knew that. I had checked. I had tried. And suddenly, here was this door, a hidden one, untouched, just sitting there like it had been waiting for me. I'll admit, I was scared, but being a kid and not really understanding what danger meant, I was a lot more excited and curious than afraid. So I just opened the door. The second it moved, even just a crack, something hit me. Not physically, not like a gust of air or anything like that, but something deeper, something instinctive, like every part of me was screaming that I shouldn't be there, that I had just done something I couldn't undo. Even at that age, that's exactly what it felt like to me, that something had latched onto me. I didn't see much in the attic, just glimpses, the edge of the attic. Thick layers of dust, webs stretched across beams. The kind of stillness that only comes from a place that hasn't been disturbed in years. But I know it wasn't empty. I didn't see anything. I just knew I wasn't alone in there. And I panicked. I slammed the door, ran back through the passage, barely even aware of where I was going, just trying to get out, trying to get back somewhere that felt normal, shouting for my grandmother before I even reached her, already crying, already terrified in a way that didn't make sense for what I had actually seen. But her reaction made it worse, because she didn't calm me down. She didn't tell me it was okay. The moment she realized where I had been, what I had opened, she broke like something inside her snapped. I had never seen an adult react like that before. That's when it stopped feeling like a childhood fear and started feeling like something real. Everything after that is fragmented. Obviously, what I'm telling you happened years ago, and because of that, my memory isn't perfect. It's strange because there are parts of it I remember with absolute clarity, like I could just close my eyes and be right back in that dark place, staring at it all over again. But then there are other parts, like what led me to the attic, what happened right after I told my grandmother, that feel fragmented, almost out of reach. There are things I genuinely can't remember, no matter how hard I try. I've even tried hypnosis at one point, and while it helped a little, there's still this barrier in my mind, something that feels like it's actively stopping me from remembering everything as clearly as I want to. I remember the bath, the water hotter than it should have been, the smell of salt, so much salt that it stung my skin, and her hands shaking while she poured it in, muttering things under her breath that I couldn't understand. I remember my grandfather being sent into town, coming back with things I didn't recognize, and then later, a fire outside with objects being burned. Things from the house, I think, though I couldn't tell you what. The next day, there were people there. Men who went straight to that part of the house, sealing the passage, not just locking it, but closing it off completely, like it had never been there. And a woman who spoke to me in a language I didn't know, asking me to repeat words that felt heavy in my mouth. And then just gaps. Whole pieces of that time are just missing. But what stayed was the feeling. The feeling that after that, I was never alone again. especially at night. There was always something. Not something I could see, not something I could hear clearly, but something that was there, watching and waiting, close enough that I could feel it, even when I tried to ignore it. And as I got older, it didn't go away. It just changed, became quieter and heavier, like it settled into me instead of staying around me. I know this probably makes me sound crazy, but I swear that's exactly what it feels like something that was in that attic latched onto me deep inside and never really left. Even in college, miles away and surrounded by people, I'd have moments where I'd feel it again. That same presence, dragging at me, pulling me down, sitting there in the dark while I tried to sleep. And I never told anyone. Because how do you even begin to explain something like that without sounding like you've completely lost it? I tried talking to my grandmother about it years later, when I was older, when I thought maybe she'd finally tell me the truth. But by then, Alzheimer's had already taken most of her. There was one moment, though, where she looked at me like she knew exactly what I was asking, and she told me there had been something in that attic, something old and strong, and that whoever let it out wouldn't ever really be free of it again. In that moment, she was confirming everything I had felt over the years, and I tried to ask her how she knew all of that. But even the way she said those things was scattered, almost disconnected. To anyone else, probably even my mom, it would have sounded like the rambling of someone who had lost touch with reality. But I knew that wasn't the case. I knew she understood exactly what she was saying, even if she couldn't fully put it into words, even if her thoughts came out in fragments. After she told me that, I just sat there with her for a long time, holding her hand, both of us staring out the window without really saying anything else. I couldn't even tell what I was feeling in that moment, whether it was some kind of relief, knowing I wasn't crazy and that there really was something I didn't understand, or something closer to dread, realizing she had just confirmed I might have to live with that feeling for the rest of my life. All I know is that it took a nurse telling me twice that visiting hours were over before I finally got up and left. She died not long after, and my parents didn't want anything to do with the house. They never had. So it ended up with me. Which brings me to the present moment. I haven't been back to the house since, not once. It's been 5 years now, and I've done everything I can to avoid it, to pretend it's just a place, just a house, just something I can ignore, but I can't anymore. Because a few weeks ago, I got a call saying someone broke in, vandalized parts of the house, forced entry, damaged things inside, and now there are documents that need to be signed, things that need to be handled in person, which means I have to go back. And I don't know how to explain this in a way that doesn't sound insane, but the fear I feel about stepping into that house again isn't just about what's there. It's about what's been with me this whole time. Over the years, I learned how to live with it. Like I adapted to its presence just as much as it adapted to mine. But there were periods in my life that were really bad. And what scares me now is the idea of going back to that house and completely losing control. What I'm about to tell you started more than 25 years ago. I'm only telling it now because about a week ago, my son said something that genuinely terrified me. And I'm not someone who scares easily, not anymore at least, but this hit differently. And to be honest, I feel a little lost right now, like I don't really know what I'm supposed to do next. I told my wife about it, and she had the exact same reaction I did, completely freaked out. But the thing is, she didn't go through what I went through as a kid, so for her, it's just unsettling. For me, it's something else entirely. So, I guess I need to go back a bit and explain everything from the beginning, otherwise none of this is going to make sense. I've got a 5-year-old son, and everything I'm about to tell you started about 30 years ago, when I was around his age, maybe a little older. I've lived my whole life in the Appalachian Mountains. Never really left, never went to college, and honestly, I don't regret that. I built a life here, learned things on my own, and I'm happy where I am. My wife, on the other hand, she's from Denver. She actually went to college. She's a biologist and studies wildlife out here. And about 7 years ago, she moved here for work. That's when we met, and we decided to stay. It made sense. This place was already my home, and it became hers too. Our house sits at the very end of a dead-end road, so on one side there's a neighbor, but on the other side, and behind us, it's just forest. Thick, endless forest. It's actually pretty similar to the house I grew up in, except that one was even more isolated. My bedroom window back then looked straight into the trees, and now it's the same for me, for my wife, and for my son. So, yeah, this is the kind of place we live in. Quiet, remote, beautiful. But also the kind of place where things can happen without anyone ever knowing. And growing up, I loved it. I really did. But things were different back then. I know 30 years doesn't sound like that long, but out here, it is. Back then, there were a lot more stories going around about the forest. And not just random stories, warnings really. There were people, dangerous people, who used these woods as hunting grounds, kids mostly, and parents, including mine, would tell us all kinds of things to keep us from wandering too far in. Some of those stories stuck with me more than they probably should have. I made a point not to pass those stories down to my son. I didn't want to scare him the way I had been scared. Because the truth is, sometimes those stories mess with you more than they protect you. As I got older, I started realizing most of them were just that. Stories. Exaggerations. Things adults said to keep kids close to home. But there was one story that never really left me, because unlike the others, I had reasons to believe it wasn't just a story. When I was a kid, around 5 or 6, my grandfather told me about a man who had been chained up in the forest by people from the nearby town. They said he was responsible for a series of crimes, but according to the story, he was innocent. He had been made a scapegoat. The real criminals were people with influence, people who needed someone to take the fall so they could keep doing what they were doing without suspicion. So they chained him in the woods and they did terrible things to him. When he was dying, still chained, he swore he would come back for them. Not just them, but their families and friends, their children and their grandchildren. The story went that at night, if a child misbehaved, they would hear the sound of chains dragging through the forest, slow and heavy. If they opened a window or stepped outside, or did anything they weren't supposed to do, that man would come for them. He would wrap them in chains and take them back into the forest with him. I was just a kid, so yeah, it scared the hell out of me. But at the same time, I believed I was a good kid, so I figured I didn't have anything to worry about. That's what kids do. right? They find ways to make themselves feel safe. And for a while, that worked. Until one night, it didn't. I remember it clearly, in a way that doesn't really make sense after all these years. I woke up in the middle of the night, and at first I didn't know why. I just had that feeling, like something had pulled you out of sleep. And then I heard it. Chains dragging across the ground, getting closer and closer. I must have been around 8 at that point, maybe a little older, but I remember exactly how it felt. My whole body went stiff, like I couldn't even move, like if I stayed still enough, maybe it wouldn't notice me. My room was full of stuffed toys back then. And that night, I remember stacking them around me, building this little wall, like somehow that was going to protect me from whatever was outside. I stayed there, barely breathing, listening to those chains scraping against the ground, getting closer and closer. And even now, I can still hear it if I think about it too hard. I think that was the first time I ever felt real fear. Not the kind you laugh off, but the kind that makes you feel sick. And I did get sick. For a couple of days after that, I was throwing up, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep properly, just completely messed up. And then on the third night, I heard it again. At that point, something in me just snapped a little. Earlier that day, some kids had been messing with me, saying I needed to be braver, that I needed to stand up for myself. And I don't know why, but that stuck with me. So, even though I was absolutely terrified, I got out of bed. I remember moving so slowly, like every step felt loud, even though I was trying not to make a sound, and I walked up to the window. My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my ears. Then I looked outside, and he was there. Out by the trees, just at the edge where the yard meets the forest, there was a figure, dragging chains behind him. I couldn't see his face properly. It was too dark. But I could see the way he moved, slow, like he wasn't in any rush because he knew exactly where he was going. I don't even remember deciding to scream. It just happened. I ran out of my room, down the hallway, yelling for my parents, completely out of control. My mom took me seriously right away. She let me sleep in their room, stayed with me, tried to calm me down. And over the next few days, they tried to figure out what had happened, whether I had really seen someone or if it was just my imagination. She even argued with my grandfather, told him he shouldn't be telling stories like that to a kid my age. And then it just stopped. I never heard the chains again after that. Weeks went by, then months, and eventually I convinced myself it hadn't been real. That I'd scared myself, that my brain filled in the gaps, like kids do. I grew up, moved on, and carried on with my life. The fear never completely went away, especially at night, but it became something distant, something I could manage. Until last week, when my son came into our room in the middle of the night, crying, shaking, saying the man with the chains was outside and that he was coming to get him. And I swear to you, in that moment, it felt like something inside me just dropped. Like all those years between then and now disappeared, and I was 8 years old again, standing at that window. I held him, told him it wasn't real, that he was safe, that he could stay with us, and he eventually calmed down. But the next day, me and my wife sat him down, tried to understand where this was coming from. We asked if anyone at school had told him a story, if someone had scared him, if he'd heard it anywhere. He said no. He said he just saw him out by the trees. I went to the school and tried to find out whether the teachers knew about any story that might be going around among the kids. I asked other parents if the children seemed scared, or if anyone had heard or sensed that their child knew something. But nothing. Some parents, I felt, got uneasy when I brought it up. I could sense their own childhood fears resurfacing. But they said their children were fine, sleeping alone in their rooms and not having nightmares. And that's the part I can't shake. Because I never told him that story. My parents definitely didn't. My wife had never even heard it before I told her. So there's no reason, no logical reason, for him to describe the exact same thing I saw when I was a kid. I reported it, just in case, because there's always the possibility that this is something real in a different way, that maybe someone's out there using that story to scare people, to get close to kids, to do something worse. And honestly, that possibility terrifies me too. But if I'm being completely honest, what scares me more is the other option, that it's not a person, that whatever I saw back then didn't just disappear. Since that night, my son hasn't slept alone. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I get up quietly and walk to his room, just to look out the window. But I've never seen anything. No, my son isn't making this up. And I know what I saw all those years ago. So, yeah, I don't really know what's out there. I don't know if it's something I can fight, or something I can explain, or something I can protect him from. All I know is I'm a grown man, and I'm genuinely afraid of what might be standing just beyond those trees, waiting for one of us to look a little too closely.